Okay, this is the third part of HCAM number 4. I think this one is chapter 19. So we're looking at what our goal here is to try to determine, which direction the beams are going to be located in. And what they're giving us here is a building, a structural frame. You can see the little H's or I's here. These guys are basically columns. There's one here, one on the corner. And if you look at the bay spacing, I've got a 25-foot bay right here, and I have a 30-foot bay over on this side. So take a look on page 958 in your text. That would be Appendix B. And up at the top of the page, it shows you pretty much what you need to figure this out. So take a look at this as kind of a puzzle, a critical thinking game, or whatever you'd want to call this. But I believe your text tells you one key thing that we have to keep in mind, and I told you this in class, is that we have to be efficient with the sizing of both the girders and the beams. And our goal here in this exercise is to try to, we want to make sure that they're as close to the same depth as possible, both the beams and the girders. So we want to equalize the depth as much as possible in this. So the concept of primary versus secondary structure. So our primary structure is going to be the girder, and our secondary structure in this case is going to be the beam. So if we want to equalize the depth of both these members, does it make sense that the beam is the longer span and the girder is the shorter span? Because remember, the girder has to carry loads from the beam, and so that has to be a bigger member to begin with. So right away, you should be able to visualize, what this looks like in your head, which is which. And if you don't believe me, you probably ought to just run the calculations for both of these. And if you use 25 foot for the beam and 30 for the girder, you'll notice that one's a lot bigger in depth than the other. So the girder at 30-foot span becomes a lot deeper than the beam does. So it's not an equal situation at all. So another note that they give us here is that typical spacing of beams is 8 to 12 foot. So these are W section beams, and you can kind of see I've drawn them in here already. So if my span is 25 feet, 25 divided by 3 is going to give me 8. So if the maximum number here is 12 feet spacing, I know that I can't have just one beam there, because the spacing will exceed 12 feet. It'll be like 12 and a half feet or something. So I know that my beams, I'm just going to have 2 of them. They're going to be spaced approximately 8 foot 4 inches center to center. How do we figure out our beam depth? It's fairly simple. The span, which is 30, is divided by 22. So 30 divided by, hang on a second here, 30 feet. So 30 times 12 equals 360, divided by 22 is equal to 16.36 inches. So your beam is going to end up approximately 16 inches deep. So I'm going to write that down here, 16 inches on the beam. And then while I've got my calculator in front of me, I want to find the girder depth. So my span is 25, and I've got to convert that into inches. So I'm going to multiply that times 12, and I've got 300 there, divided by 16, and that gives me 18.75 inches. So that number's closer to 18 than it is 20. So I'm going to round that down to 18 as well. So my girders are going to be 18 inches deep, and my beams are going to be 16 inches deep. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'm going to pause this real quick, and we'll move on to... All right, so for 17.2, if we go back to page 958 in the text, it's Appendix B, and I'm looking for girders and K-series joist layouts. So that's top of the page on the right-hand side. And if we take a look at this again, I'm going to use what we talked about earlier. My joist girders are going to be the shorter span, and my joists are going to be the longer span. And that's what we're going to try here first. And I'm thinking this is still going to hold true for this. But again, if we wanted to check both ways in terms of equalizing the depth of those members, we'd have to run the numbers both ways. So again, I'd basically just plug in the span for the K-series at both 30 foot and 25 foot, and do the same thing for the joist girders, and then try to compare those two to see which is equalized and which is not. So K-series spacing, if you take a look at the note there, there's a note that says for floors, and that's what this is. It's a floor. So our spacing is going to be 2 to 4 foot on center. So what I did here was I took 25 feet and I basically divided it by 2, and I end up with 12 spaces. So I'm slightly over a 2-foot span in this case. I could spread those out if I wanted. We could do 8 of them would be, what, 8 times 3 is 24. So we'd have approximately 3 foot on center. So I'd probably do that. I'd probably end up with 8 of them at 3 foot plus or minus on center instead of the number that I have here. So so what do we do to find the depth? We need to take, for the joist, that formula is the depth equals the span divided by 16. So our span is 30 feet times 12, because we have to convert it to inches. So my span is 360 inches divided by 16, and that equals 22.5 inches. So I'm going to call this 22 inches, and that's for your K-series, the depth. And then let's run the numbers on the joist girder. So my span is 25 foot times 12, which equals 300. 300 divided by 14 is equal to 21.42. So I'm going to round that up to 22 inches. So in this case, both the K-series and the joist girders end up being the same depth. They end up being 22 inches. So I hope that helps you, and I want to take another quick look here to see, again, your base spacing is the same as the other one. You know, you have a toilet room, elevator, a stairwell. So obviously in this case, where you have a stairwell and an elevator, those are going to interrupt this base spacing of whatever you're doing here. So we'd have to work around those. So let's go to the last sheet here and see what they're asking for before we wrap up this 3-part video. So freehand sketches, draw detail sections through the spandrel beam. So they're looking for a drawing on this. I'll see if I can find something in here for you. They're looking for a drawing from the spandrel beam, which is the perimeter, to the bar joist or beam. So if you took a look at page 439 of your text, that would be an example of your spandrel beam and your bar joist and how all that ties together. We did look at that in a video, and for the beam it would be similar to that. So anyway, if you have any questions, go ahead and start a thread in the discussion area in Blackboard, and I will be in there to answer those and interact with you guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye.